I longed to touch soil. When I thought about the walks I would soon take on the banks of the Mississippi and in the woods of Louisiana, an impatient shiver passed through my body. Suddenly, it seemed that the color of the water had changed. Indeed, it had turned from a dark blue to yellow, and I saw a straight line of separation, as if drawn with a taut string, extending from east to west between the two differently colored zones. To the north, a thin blackish line half hidden by the fog indicated land. We were in the waters of the Mississippi. Soon after the ship had slackened its pace, it advanced only with difficulty and then came to a dead halt. Its hull was stuck in the mud. From a geological point of view, nothing was more interesting than these vast alluvia still in a semi-liquid state. These sands and clays, slowly worn away by flooding and by centuries of erosion from mountain ranges of North America, form a thick stratum of 200 or 300 meters. Sooner or later, through the settling and influence of geothermal heating, they will be transformed into vast foundations of rock and will serve as the basis for fertile and populated regions. These fine particles filter through the sea continuously in a creative process that adds islands, peninsulas, and coastline to the continent. By early 1853, he had realized his dream of crossing the Atlantic and was living in Louisiana. A Voyage to New Orleans, Anarchist Impressions of the Old South, recounts his passage through the Antilles, his trip up the Mississippi to New Orleans, as his fascinating observations on the Queen City of the South and on antebellum society.
Originally, I wanted you to be the judge, which is really the better thing to be. I wanted to be Reclus, but she said she didn't want anybody to be Reclus.
Nobody's going to be anybody, and it's someone asked. It's not Reclus.
Okay.
It's not Reclus. Okay, camera going. Oops, wait.
Is it true that it is expressly forbidden by law to carry concealed weapons on one's person? Someone once asked a famous Louisiana judge.
Certainly, we cannot thank our state legislature enough for having forbidden the carrying of concealed weapons.
Then what would you do if I insulted or slapped you?
What would I do? And pulling a loaded revolver from his belt, he pointed it directly at the head of the questioner.
While he had already experienced in Europe the economic inequality and exploitation, he discovered in America an economistic outlook that went beyond anything he had previously encountered. He writes to his brother that the country seemed to be nothing more than a great auction house in which everything is for sale, the slaves and the owner into the bargain, votes and honor, the Bible and consciousness. Everything goes to the highest bidder. Okay. While Reclus found many admirable qualities such as energy and creativity in American culture, he retained throughout his life the view that it was deeply corrupted by the dominance of economic power and capitalist values. Reclus saw domination by wealth and economic power and the society's pervasive economistic outlook to be powerful and disturbing tendencies. Over the century and a half to follow, economic inequality has become ever more entrenched. Democracy has become increasingly nominal as concentrated wealth openly dominates the political sphere, and economistic values have become more deeply rooted in the culture of consumer society. This landscape has an eternal, unchanging quality, and it inspires through its tranquility, its majesty, and the grandeur of its lines rather than because of its details. In order to love and understand Louisiana, one must spend every evening contemplating the severe horizon of its forests, the solemn beauty of its countryside, and the silent current of its river. He didn't see me at all, but hearing my approaching steps, he pulled out of his pocket a bundle of newspapers which he held out without even looking at me, without even expecting the least gratitude from me. Indeed, I didn't have the glaring naivete to thank him, and I got away from him as far as possible to engross myself in reading of the New Orleans Daily Delta. The cane rose 20 feet above my head and only allowed a narrow view of the sky and an electric telegraph wire. Science seems out of place in the wilderness of Louisiana, and this wire that mysteriously transmits thoughts seemed all the more strange in that it passes above these reeds, far from all cultivated fields between stagnant marshes and a muddy river. Such is the march of civilization in the United States, here on soggy ground that is not even a part of the continent yet, but only the residue of waves. The telegraph is the first work of humans. It sways amid the high stalks of cane, and so long as a speculator does not have it cut, it transmits the news quite well. Sometimes wild cattle wandering through the thicket knock down the poles with their horns, but as long as electricity flows obediently through the wire, no one even thinks of putting them back up. If the creeping roots of the reeds did not hold the soil with their clinging network, few waves would suffice to carry away the embankment and cut out a new mouth in the river. The only vegetation of these damp, narrow beaches is wild cane, for trees cannot grow here. One must go about 40 kilometers into the mouth to find a clump of earth high enough for even a poor stunted willow to cling to. The region of willows is followed by that of the Louisiana cypress. Although these trees require firmer soil than willows, the ground in which they grow is still half hidden under pools of stagnant water and in fact disappears entirely during flooding. The cypress is a superb tree with a straight, smooth trunk that has no branches for 20 to 25 meters. Its base is supported in the ground by thick roots that project in all directions like buttresses. Conical excrescences resembling thorns several feet high rise through the pools of water around the cypress. There are actually aerators that serve to carry air to the underground roots of the cypress, which would otherwise be deprived of it by the layer of water. The foliage of the tree consists of needles that are much smaller than those of the pine, and the branches are often so bare that they seem to have been devastated by fire. Their only embellishment is long tresses of flowing moss, locally called Spanish beard. Great savannas sometimes extend between the cypress forest bordering the edge of the Mississippi and the already distant seashore. These areas are home to multitudes of birds. The hunters have found that the easiest way to make them leave their nests and shoot them in flight is to set the grass of the savanna on fire. This barbarous method is forbidden, but this does not in the least stop the hunters from resorting to such an expeditious means of flushing out the birds. During the day, all these burning prairies cast a distinctly reddish glow on the atmosphere, and one can see nothing but black smoke extending heavily over the horizon. But the night reveals an awesome sight to the traveler. When the flames of several days of fire finally die out, the ground is covered by a thick layer of ash over an area of several square kilometers, and the marsh grass that composes the soil of undulating prairies has been burned several feet deep. The hunters have achieved their goal. They had a magnificent fowl hunt. In general, we find that everything has been mismanaged so that what is left is a pseudo-nature spoiled by 1,000 details, ugly constructions, trees lopped and twisted, footpaths brutally cut through woods and forests. He notes that the motivation for our treatment of the natural world has not been a sentiment of respect and feeling for nature, but rather of purely industrial or mercantile interests. He writes of a secret harmony that exists between the earth and humanity, and warns that when reckless societies allow themselves to meddle with that which creates the beauty of their domain, they always end up regretting it. For Reclus, whatever we do to nature, we inevitably do to ourselves. He observes that where the land has been defaced, where all poetry has disappeared from the countryside, the imagination is extinguished, the mind becomes impoverished, and routine and servility seize the soul, inclining it toward torpor and death. In short, our injuries to the natural world immediately become injuries to humanity itself. In the United States, everyone and everything changes and moves with a rapidity inconceivable to those of us who are accustomed always to follow one long routine. In Europe, each stone has its own history. We obey traditions rather than humans and let ourselves be governed by the dead more than the living. In America, there is nothing of the kind. Not a single superstition is attached to the past or the native soil, and the population, moving like the surface of a lake seeking its level, distributes itself entirely according to the laws of economics. In the young and growing republic, there are already as many ruins as in our old empires. Present-day life is too active and tempestuous for the traditions of the past to dominate the soul. Instinctive love of country in its native simplicity no longer exists in the United States. For the masses, all feelings merge more and more with pecuniary interests. But for those who are noble at heart, as rare in America as in every nation in the world, there is no country other than liberty.